Well, it's good to know we're early.
Welcome to this workshop of the Hopkins School Board. So great to see my board colleagues at the table. And welcome to our community members who are joining us via the YouTube live stream. We have some exciting agenda items for the workshop this evening, so I think we'll dig right in, and I'll pass it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed, who will introduce our first agenda item, assessing scholar learning and pandemic impact.
Thank you so much, Chair Bouchard, and good evening to all school board members, community members who are hopefully listening in, and all leaders who are present with us this evening, including our student board leaders. A couple of board meetings ago, one of our board members asked a really intriguing question around how we are monitoring students and assessing for scholar learning during this unprecedented time when it's been almost 20 months since COVID-19 first made impact and sent school systems and communities, families into a somewhat panicked scramble, and we've been navigating day by day, month by month, through the rest of that first school year when COVID-19 hit in the spring, and then all of last school year, 2021, implementing strong mitigation measures while facilitating learning, both in-person and distance learning for students. So our students and families, staff, our community has been through a lot in general, but also specifically to how education has been facilitated. Been a lot of unique challenges that have most definitely impacted our students, and now it's time for us to assess, well, how are our students doing, not just academically, but socio-emotionally? What is the state of our students' mental health? What are the different measures and diagnostics we're using to assess where our students are currently at and what their unique needs might be and how we might address our students' unique learning needs. So that, of course, our core function as a system is teaching and learning. So we think a lot about curriculum design, teaching and learning practices, as well as assessment practices. And we have very creative and caring school leaders who really do think about what our students are presenting in real time and how we might proactively and responsively address what students are presenting to us. So thank you for asking the question and allowing this time for us to describe how we're thinking about this this unique time and how we are monitoring our students. And I would like to invite Ann Ertl, our Director of Innovation Design and Learning, to the virtual board table. And we have put together some information for our board members, for our community members, and then we look forward to questions that you might have. Ann?
Hi, good evening, board members and Dr. Mary Perry Reed. Elise is going to share my slide deck. Perfect. Thank you, Elise. So tonight I'm going to talk about, tonight I'm going to talk about data and how we collect data on our students to, as Dr. Mary Perry Reed described, really monitor how our students are doing academically, as well as social, emotionally, and so on. And so I've prepared some slides for you to talk through where we're going in terms of our data collection for students. So, and I'm framing this in the context of our learning framework, which is at its very center about personalizing learning for students. So personalized learning was something that was needed prior to COVID, but of course the pandemic has helped us realize that a personalized approach is critical to meeting students' unique needs, especially as the pandemic continues to persist. Each one of our students experienced academics and experienced home life in a different way during the pandemic. And now it's on it's our responsibility to really design experiences and learning that meet them where they're at. Go ahead, Elise, to the next slide. So this is a type of graph that looks really familiar. This is where we might start to talk about learning data, and frankly, where a lot of districts stop when they talk about learning data. These are Mca scores. So you can see that that first measurement is in 2017, and the last one is 2021. The blue line are the state scores, and the green line are the Hopkins scores. So just as a reminder for everybody, students in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 take the MCA. And we can see that between 2019, we did see a decline from 55% proficient to 50% proficient in 2021. And as a reminder, there was no MCA testing in 2020. So the trajectory of our scores are very similar to the state scores. It's also worth noting that in 2019, Hopkins tested about 3,200 students used on the MCA, which is a requirement, but families are able to opt out. And in 2021, we tested only about 2,000 students. So the number of students who are opting out of MCAs is increasing, particularly at the secondary level. Go ahead, Elise, to the next slide. This is another graph that shows our reading data. And actually, I'm sorry, the header should say percent proficient in reading MCA. Apologies for that. So again, the reading declines are not as extreme as we saw in the math, only about a 3% difference between 2019 and 2021. And again, significantly fewer students choosing to assess in 2021 as compared to 2019. So one of the reasons that as a system, we don't want to just stop with looking at MCA data is for that reason, that as our community changes and perhaps responds to the pandemic or the changing landscape of education, MCA data is not sufficient in telling us really what we want and need to know about our students' learning. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's a lot of media buzz and hand-wringing about the concept of learning loss. Really, learning loss is a concept that's built on a false narrative. The narrative that students are vessels that get filled up based on an amount of time, either in a classroom or engaged in an activity, has always been false. Students learn at their own developmental rates and paces. And it's typically the system that puts them in a box according to their age or their grade level. Furthermore, the way that we measure is a one-size-fits-all approach. And while that data might be helpful at the start, we need more. Go on to the next slide. This is what Valerie Strauss said about learning loss in the Washington Post. And I'm just going to read a couple of the highlighted parts. She said, when it comes to K-12 schooling, the truth is some of us are more used to interruptions than others. Learning is never lost, though it may not always be found on pre-written tests of pre-specified knowledge or pre-existing measures of pre-corona notions of achievement. And finally, and this I think is really important, the legacy of our standards movement and high stakes testing that accompanies it is a version of education that is assumed not to exist or matter unless it is predicted and measured. And I think that what we all can see with clearer eyes now, than we could pre-pandemic, is that this assumption is wrong. We do, in order to personalize education, however, we do need to collect data, a lot of data, so that we can meet kids where they're at and grow them from wherever that is. So Elise, if you go to the next slide, I'm gonna share with you a framework of looking at data from a really kind of transformational book called Street Data. And I can send this information if anybody's interested, but the authors of this model are Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan. And they really talk about 3 levels of data. So you'll notice on the left column, that satellite data, those are sort of the big overall things that we measure and that we report to the state. You'll see many of the things that show up in the world's best workforce in that left column. So that is kind of our starting place. If you think about data as a funnel, this is kind of the widest area of the funnel. The next level of data is what the authors refer to as map data. So here we're getting a little bit more specific. We're not at the 100,000 foot lens, but we're getting a little more specific. So map data, it could be things like IB grades, formative and summative assessments. We've got our elementary math and literacy screeners and progress monitoring tools, Panorama, SEL screener, and our Youth Truth student survey. So as you can see by the number of examples there, we are also pretty good in Hopkins about collecting map data. And that further helps us refine where our students are at in terms of their learning and their SEL learning, and where we might want to grow them. But the final and really perhaps a more transformational way to collect and think about data is at the street level. So street data refers to things like student work, student focus groups, and empathy interviews. So I want to give just a couple of examples of what that might look like in real life, and how we might actually use those different levels of data to improve a learning experience, either at the individual student level or at a classroom level or so on. So, and this actually is a real example from and pre-pandemic. So according to the MCAs in 2018-19, at one of our elementary schools, we found that our African-American girls did not grow as readers at the same rate as their same age peers. So that was like a high level of data that is good to know, frankly not that actionable, because we're not really sure why that is. So drilling down to the next level, we looked at MAP scores, and NWEA MAP scores indicated the same trend. And MAP was, and still is to some extent, another literacy tool that we use. Another tool that we used was a reading attitude survey. And the students themselves rated that they didn't view themselves as good readers. And so the next step that was taken was journey maps of the students indicated that over the course of their experience in Hopkins, they had been part of intervention groups. So a clearer picture starts to emerge of what we might think about and plan to do differently with this group of students. So the next piece was to find some street data and really dig in to figure out what might be actionable, what might we be able to do right now to help these students, but then also inform our systemic planning as well. And so empathy interviews were conducted with parents, and we learned that their students had reported a number of microaggressions occurring in their class. Also, empathy interviews of the students told us that the students didn't like the books simply that were happening or that were being read in their class or offered to them as texts. So both of those two things then indicate to our system and to our teachers potential responses that we wouldn't have seen or gotten to had we just stopped at that satellite data level. Go ahead to the next slide. This is another local example. So another example of satellite level data could indicate that our graduation rate for Latinx males is lower than for some of our other subgroups. And at the MAP data level, our panorama survey did indicate that of all of our students in 2018, that our Latinx males felt the most disconnected or the most disengaged with the culture at Hopkins High School of any of our subgroups. So following that, a street level data point was that our Latinx males indicated a lack of knowledge about post-secondary options of interest. So again, that gives us an opportunity to make some changes both for these students and for students going forward. Go ahead, Elise. So we do have some tools that we can use to support street data gathering, and they are embedded right into our LOS. So you heard me talk about empathy interviews. So empathy interviews are really when we sit down and take time with caregivers and with students to learn and hear from them how they might describe their experience in any particular area. And that empathetic data gathering is the first step in our LOS. And then the following step is equally as useful. We can take that data and then do some root cause analysis. And I know the board remembers practicing with that. It's getting to that root cause is really what allows us to not only impact the experiences in the moment of students, but also suggest systemic things that we might address as well. Go ahead, Elise. So I want to just talk a little bit about the future of personalization and how we are thinking about data. So satellite data will always be there, and it will always be important because we report it to the state, and we know that it's important to our stakeholders. Where we are thinking that we want to continue growing is in that area of map data and street data. And so possible areas of growth in each of those are competency-based grading and perhaps a universal mental health screener at that map level. At the street level, personalized learning, one of the cornerstones are asset-based student profiles, which can also serve as a work sample method for reporting and showing student growth. And also, as Dr. Holm is working on, our student success metrics. And really, student success metrics, Elise, if you go to the last slide, are the umbrella that all of these things will fit under. Okay, if you want to go to the last slide, or I'm not sure if anybody would like to review any of the slides or has any questions.
Thank you so much. And it struck me as I was listening that the way that we're approaching data, that your team is approaching data in the district is both highly sophisticated and caring. And I think that intersection is what's going to get us to our Vision 2031 outcomes. So really appreciate the presentation and would open it up for questions and comments from my board colleagues.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Director Adams.
And who's going to use this data, or who is using it right now?
So that's a great question. So we're using it in a few different ways. I would say, as I mentioned, that satellite level data, we report that to the state, and you'll be seeing the full World's Best Workforce report in November. So we do still use that data. Now, at the map data level, that's that middle level. A lot of that data that's collected is we can look at it in terms of trends, but it also helps our teachers in planning their instruction and in planning both at the individual and at the classroom level. And then some of the SEL screeners and the Youth Truth Survey also do point us as a system in terms of things that we might want to be paying attention to that are not directly related to academics, such as students' feeling of belonging and things of that nature. At the street data level, I'll tell you, this I think is an area that we are growing in the most. An example of street data that I can give is a couple of weeks ago, a couple members of my team and I met with our teachers, our outdoor immersion teachers at Alice Smith, at Eisenhower, and met with them and did some observations, and because they were looking for feedback on some things that they wanted to improve about their own practice. And so even though some of these methods of data collection aren't efficient, they do prove in some ways to be really efficient, because sometimes a new fresh set of eyes we can identify what are maybe some low-hanging fruit that we can address and take care of right away, and then what are some of the areas of growth, both with students and with teachers, that that we might want to address more systemically.
Nick has just weighed in.
Chair Bouchard.
Director Cool.
I was very interested to see the trend with the MCA testing and the amount of opting out specifically in the secondary.
Yes.
So in the future, will there be an option to opt out in the same way? Question number one. And then number two, does that show a bigger trend? We know that not all students love the idea of MCAs. I'd just love to pick your brain on that specific piece.
I think, so every year, and last year was no different, families can always opt out. It's a standard form that MDE shares with districts, and families are always able to opt out. So that's standard practice. Now, last year, perhaps many more opted out because they had some concerns about coming to the building. And so I think that probably played a role. It will be interesting to see if that trend continues. But I do think overall, because there aren't, particularly for our secondary students, Mca scores have always meant to be reflective of not just the student level growth, but also like how we're doing as a district. And so I guess the motivation, especially for older kids, just isn't inherent in those assessments. And so I also kind of wonder if that trend of opting out continues, might that shift some of our policymakers' thinking in how we report data and what is the right and best way to report some of that kind of standardized learning data.
Thank you.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Director Adams.
And how does our opt-out rate compare to other school districts? Do you know, or just statewide?
That's a really good question. I don't know that. I could probably find that out. I do. I think 2021 was a little, perhaps an anomaly. Like I said, I don't know yet, but I can definitely get some comparative data and find out.
All right, that'd be great. I can say from my discussions with board members in other districts, it's a problem across the state at the secondary level, because they tend to give the MCAs around the same time as ACT and the AP tests, and you get more credit as a potential college graduate or college attendee for your ACT scores and definitely for your AP scores. So that's what the priority is for the kids. And MCAs don't, schools don't require them. It's just not a priority for most of our secondary students.
Yep, absolutely.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Vice Chair Andreessen.
Thank you. Thanks for this presentation, and it was really informative. I just have some questions about the different levels of data that you were talking about. One of the things that we discuss at the LAC every year is testing of students. And one of the tests that we've been told throughout the years that's actually helpful for students and for teachers is the MAP testing. And I think you mentioned it during your presentation, but I just wanted to confirm, would that be at the MAP data level, or is that more of a satellite?
Yep, it would be in that middle level. I think that that's definitely true. So interestingly, this year, our instructional coaches and some of our literacy and math leaders recommended that rather than the MAP assessment, and that's the NWEA, that we use a tool that's through the U of M that you likely have heard of as well, called FastBridge. And typically in past years, we'd only used FastBridge at 1 or 2 grades, I think second grade and perhaps kindergarten. But because of COVID, this year we are opting to use that math and literacy screener, K through 6, really to get a good sense of where students are at, regardless of whether they were in person or distance last year or whatever. And those screeners are happening right now. I think our 2 through 6th grade is pretty much done. And we wanted to wait on kinder and first grade until later, so they had their legs under them a little bit more. And so I think the reason that assessment was suggested is because it's faster than the MAP, and the teachers who had the most experience with it felt that the instructional information that they got from FastBridge was more actionable than they were getting from MAP. And so that is something that we're trying this year, and we'll collect feedback from our teachers as to whether that they like that assessment approach in the future. MAP, I think, will still play a role. We'll still likely be able to give the MAP if there are students that maybe miss the window or we have questions about. But this year we are trying a slightly different approach, and we think that we're going to get some better instructional data as a result.
Oh, great. So I was wondering, during the pandemic, did we administer the MAP tests, or was that something that just kind of didn't happen?
Yeah, we didn't, because because the testing window was occurring when many of our students, well, so first of all, for secondary, it's really impractical to give them in a distance learning environment, and impractical is probably even kind of putting it mildly. For our elementary students, the teachers really were concerned about having such limited time with scholars anyway on the hybrid model, that they didn't want to prioritize taking a big chunk of that time to give the standardized assessments. So last year, MAP usage was very spotty. We did, though, assess using FastBridge the majority of our second graders. And so this will be the first year that we are using that FastBridge across all elementary.
Great, thank you.
Additional questions or comments? And I had just a couple. So this idea of street data is a new one for me. And so thank you for the introduction. I'm going to hop on bookshop.org and buy that book right as soon as we get out of the meeting. Is it fair to say that street data is mostly qualitative in nature?
I think so. So I, of course, if Dr. Abby were here, she would give us all a schooling in quantitative versus qualitative. But yeah, I think the short answer to your question is yes, it's qualitative. And not to say that it's exclusionary of quantitative data, but it really humanizes the data so that you get a fuller picture, I think, of a student experience that goes well beyond, what their numbers are saying about them.
I know that type of data collection can be, we can think of it as time consuming or a really good investment of time, right? And so I've been thinking, throughout your presentation and listening to my board colleagues' excellent questions and comments, what can we do at the board level to really support this robust data collection that you've presented to us tonight as we move forward? And you don't need to answer that right now. I just wanted to kind of put that out there. And if you do have ideas now, great. I think, Shannon brought up the connection with LAC advocacy, if there's a direct connection there, if there are policy changes that need to be made at the board level or other types of alignment. Just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that I think that our system and our board, I'm grateful that there is value placed in more of the street level data, the qualitative data. And so, the obvious thing is, and this is nothing new, of course, but I think the more that we can move our legislators into realizing that, it's not that satellite data that tells the whole story, and provide our systems with more of a, not a purpose, but I guess what the state privileges as the most important data tends to also be sometimes what stakeholders in our system privilege as well. And the more we can shift that mindset, I think the more we will be able to work really toward that personalized environment that we're aiming for.
Thank you. Early on in the presentation, you talked about learning loss, and that that whole concept is really based on a false premise, and I absolutely endorse that idea as an educator. And I'm wondering, what are some of the counter narratives that have emerged, around what students did learn and continue to learn during the pandemic? That there are all these different types of knowledge and levels of knowledge that our scholars in Hopkins have gained. Have we done any work as a system to kind of identify some of those things and really support a counter narrative to learning loss?
We did, and in particular, I'm thinking a lot about the significant amount of surveying that took place last spring around just those topics, because we were very curious to know, in the midst of all of this societal discussion of loss, what emerged for students and for families that could be considered a gain. And so I know that we have some data on that particularly from last spring, where we did a lot of interviews. And in fact, we did teacher focus groups too at that time about, what has been gained, what have you learned in your practice as a teacher as a result of kind of this unprecedented time. So we could definitely revisit some of that information. I know that, quite frankly, in ways that we can easily describe and in ways that we probably haven't even discovered yet, teaching and learning is, in my opinion, completely altered from what it was pre-COVID. And I think that one of the ways that our Vision 2031 has benefited from the pandemic is that it's really, some of the why has been really catapulted forward. We always knew that a one-size-fits-all approach wasn't working, and now things like that are just laid so much more bare. So you don't need to convince the same stakeholders that personalized is the way to go. It's pretty clear now to everybody.
Thank you. Any additional board member comments or questions?
I did have just one follow-up question. Your question, Chair Bouchard, reminded me. I'm wondering, is there any funding at the state level tied to how districts or schools perform on the MCAs?
I probably shouldn't answer that because I don't know for sure. I think not, but I wonder if Dr. Mary Perry Reed or Director Chapanduka know that for sure.
So what I believe to be true is that for districts that have higher than state average results, there are no dollar incentives provided, but for districts that show they have a widening gap or their scores are declining over time, then technical assistance is provided to those districts, not necessarily in the form of dollars, but in the form of technical support, whether it comes from MDE or from a regional education agency. So there is, the state does scrutinize how districts are doing to be able to target support. But I don't think there's a monetary incentive for higher performing districts.
Anything else? Great. Well, thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate you being with us this evening and for this presentation, because I think it really responds to a lot of what we've been hearing from community members around kind of this tension, right? Like, how are we talking about what happened last year in terms of what students learned or didn't learn, right? And then as we transition our system, and we know that we're not the only district that's having these discussions, right? Like, this is really a nationwide discussion as we, talk about the effectiveness of standardized testing or the ineffectiveness of standardized testing. There's sort of this tension around, how do we move into a new realm of teaching and learning and assessment, and at the same time hold ourselves accountable as a system. And so I think the way that you've described those different tiers of data is really helpful for us as a board to just understand, how we're navigating that transition here in Hopkins. So thank you. I'll turn it back to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard, and thank you, Anne, for your presentation. We do, regarding your question, Chair Bouchard, on what we did learn about scholars in terms of what they learned about themselves, we did have a lot of data that we pulled from the spring survey. And so I can forward that to board members, and maybe we can find a way to post it on our website. It's really interesting anecdotal data, so this is more qualitative, but our data scientist has studied it for themes and patterns, and we can provide those on our website and promote them to the community. But really, really interesting things, like I learned to stay calm during difficult times. I learn better with animals around me, for example, my dogs. It's difficult to learn without the teacher's help. I don't need to be in school to succeed. My time management and ability to focus definitely puts me at an advantage for distance learning. Things are going to get hard, but you have to let time do its work, and it will get better. So perseverance, resilience. So we have literally hundreds of deep reflections like this from our students, and I think we need to find a way of sharing those results with our community members.
I think that would be wonderful. Just the few that you read there were really inspiring. So I think it would be something that's not only useful for our community to know, but just, really edifying as well. So thank you. I love that idea.
Okay. Should we go on to the next?
Sure.
item?
Yeah, we'll move to agenda item number 2, which is our community engagement and learning parameters redesign update. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Well, thank you so much. I am going to share my screen here. Okay, so we wanted to share with our board members and our community a report that summarizes how we've been engaging with our internal and external community members. I really shouldn't use those words, internal and external. We're all a family. We're all one community, right? Those are more formal terms, but we have been engaging with all of our stakeholders around 4 key topics that came out of the 2018 strategic task forces. So if you remember back in 2018, in the fall of 2018, we launched Vision 2031. And then we identified 9 strategic task forces and had over 250 community members participate on those 9 teams. And so what we have been working on is a way to further or follow through on many of those recommendations. So this slide shows what the 4 topics were and how they stemmed from the 2018 recommendations. I do want to mention that we have a wonderful partner in this work, 2 women, Meredith Fox and Holly Craigthorpe from Portage Partners Consulting. This kind of community engagement work does require a lot of heavy lifting that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own as district leaders, just because we're managing quite a lot these days. So they have conducted a great deal of research. They have organized a thorough process for us. They have put together content and partnered with communications and marketing to put all of that content on a website. So it's been, we're really pleased with the partnership that we have with them. But the 4 key topics: school year calendar, which includes possibly piloting a year-round elementary school here in Hopkins, grade configuration, specifically where 9th and 6th graders should be educated, flexing place, space, and even time, and school start times, so adjusting school start times based on recommendations. All of these came directly from recommendations from our 2018 task forces. So we had the school year structures and calendar task force that recommended a much more equitable calendar and more creative, responsive school year models. We had a task force that recommended moving 9th graders to the high school. We had a task force that recommended creating many more learning opportunities outside of and beyond school walls. And then a task force, as well as feedback from our older students during COVID last year, recommending that school start later for our junior high and senior high students. And so in wanting to be responsive to our community, we have spent a great deal of time focusing on these 4 questions. The entire project has been segmented into 3 parts. So the putting together the design for the process, and really there's been a steering committee group of us that has partnered with with Meredith and Holly on that process design, collecting data. So we're past the first phase, and through the second step of stakeholder engagement, we held 4 stakeholder engagement sessions, 2 in person, 2 virtual, and we're now in sort of the looking at all of the feedback and moving toward decision-making phase. So we do hope to engage multiple times with you as school board members, starting today, and then in both of our November meetings, so that you can hear much more about the process, all of the information that we've collected, as well as the recommendations, and help us make a decision for our system. There has been a fairly large steering committee that has guided the process. We definitely did not want this to be a kind of effort where 2 or 3 people are sort of working in a silo to design something that lots of others are expected to engage in. So we're pleased with the number of folks that we had on our steering committee to help say what a thorough process might look like. And then, so these are all of the members, and these are all of the members from the steering committee, and then there were some additional members. But we divided ourselves into 4 groups, 1 per topic, so that we could spend some time reviewing all of the research and making sure that the models we presented for community feedback had already been vetted and thought through. And so just some stats on how many folks attended each session. We did have some scholar engagement. It would have been nice to have greater attendance and participation from our scholars. We really struggle to get information in front of our students. we've had students tell us over and over again, kids don't read emails. You have to text us. So that's,
Really?
yeah. So that's something that we're going to have to figure out. How do we collect cell phone numbers for all of our students?
One big group text.
One big group text. But if you look at the numbers, we're really pleased with the number of folks who took 90 minutes. Each of these sessions were 90 minutes to just show up and participate in a protocol that allowed us to get some information about how folks were thinking, and I think allowed them to just have a space and have a voice. So it was a really nice process, and many of you attended as well. So our participants did mostly include caregivers. We did have staff and students, but most of it was parents. Most of our participants were white, so we are going to be doing some oversampling in our survey to make sure that our populations of colors, voices, and perspectives are equitably represented. And then you can see some details in the last bullet about, which schools might have had some brighter attendance. And then we wanted to share that there were some interesting, maybe somewhat predictable themes that emerged from the conversations. Families are definitely looking for some options that alleviate any stress that they may be experiencing as a family. Families, students, and staff are always concerned about how would this change benefit our students. So that's always a factor that's at play. Another thing is, how might this impact the mental health of those involved, right? What are the stress levels associated with this kind of a change? So it was really helpful just to hear, as parents would introduce themselves and say, how many kids they have, where they go to school, and then just talk about what their personal or family experience has been or what their hope or dream is. It was just really fascinating to hear all of those stories. And one thing we also heard is for parents to hear each other's stories was, really interesting as well. So there was some shifts in thinking and perspectives that occurred in real time through this dialogue. So we're currently at the feasibility stage. So Pam Carmen is one of our data queens in Hopkins. She's on Director Chapanduca's team, and she will be heading up our feasibility studies so we can look at potential impact with transportation, athletics, food service. We don't want to leave anyone out. Before and after care, right? So what would the impact to kids in Co be if we started school earlier for elementary students, for example? What would the impact on athletics be if we started school later for secondary students, which means you get out later, not you don't get out at the same time. It's like, I know. So we want to make decisions that are well-informed and allow us to, play scenarios out to be able to anticipate what some of the, opportunities or challenges might be with each scenario. And so we're hoping to have this information for you, completed for you by that last board meeting in November, which is November 23. We currently have a survey that is out, and I will share the specific, some of the specific results, a quick update on the specific results during my superintendent's report, but over 3,000 people have responded, so this is really, really wonderful feedback, and there's some really interesting trends and patterns in that feedback as well. And then the survey closes this Friday, so if you are a parent and you haven't taken it, please do. You can even get your phone out right now and capture that QR code. And again, we will share our recommendations and deep thinking with you on November 23rd, informed by lots and lots of information. So we hope that you're pleased with all the work that's been done to gather multiple perspectives. And right now, the recommendations are to hold off on piloting a year-round school. There were many stakeholders, including ourselves, who believe that we probably need to take another school year to explore what that would look like, where it would be, and what the implementation would require. So the recommendation is to use the 22-23 school year to continue to explore the year-round model. Another recommendation is, if space cooperates, to keep 6th graders in elementary, but move 9th graders to the high school. And then the when, so does the board agree that we should move 9th graders to the high school? And what timeline would the community support? What timeline would, there are going to be implications for the move. So, within what kind of timeline do we have to operate in a way that doesn't have us completely scrambling? And then the final recommendation that is a pretty big deal is to adjust school start times to have elementary students starting earlier and secondary, which means junior and senior high students starting later. And so we've put these recommendations in the survey so that folks who are responding to the survey are actually responding to a specific question about whether they support the recommendation or not. And then we also, we sent all of our about 45 leaders a specific survey for leaders to respond to each of these scenarios as well. That we've been doing, it's been somewhat fun. I think we thought that it was going to be a load of work, and I think probably for Meredith and Holly, it was, and maybe for some of the rest of us, but it's been I would say very manageable because Meredith and Holly have helped so much, so we're grateful to them for their partnership. And so that's it, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Portage Partners, they've been with us since our Vision 2031
Yep.
ideation work.
They're a good
Yeah,
team.
yeah, absolutely. I've been really impressed by their work. Great, thank you. Any questions or comments from my board colleagues?
Okay. First of all, I didn't catch it if there was one, but is there a specific recommendation yet on start times?
Yes. So the recommendation is to quote unquote flip start times so that elementary students would start earlier and junior high and senior high students would start later than your current 7:55 start time.
Okay.
How do you feel about that?
What I feel and what I've heard from other people is that it's irritating for athletics, but to end later. But it's also true that the more districts in the Lake Conference, for example, start doing it, the more the norm it will become and the easier it'll be in terms of athletics. So,
It's
there's
true.
both sides to that.
If we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most high schools in the Lake Conference do start later than like 7:45. But they might not start as late as 9, so when we say later, we're not talking 10 o'clock. It
Yeah.
might be 30, 45 minutes later, and beyond that, I think it would be hard to stay on the same page with Lake Conference high schools. But hopefully our feasibility study will share more nuanced data about that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Chair Bouchard.
Director Cool.
So specifically about ninth graders possibly transitioning, one of the questions that I have, hopefully will be a part of the feedback over the next couple of meetings, is where was the change, or where is the mindset change from 5 years ago, I think it was, that was in front of the board. And there was such a negative view on that, I remember. So I'm assuming that there'll be some type of information provided of what has really changed.
Yeah, from listening to many parents share and also to listening to staff who were here, whenever that was, like almost 6 years ago,
Steve?
it seemed that there was a lot of concern about moving sixth graders, taking sixth graders
Okay.
out of elementary and moving them to a junior high. And, we talked a lot in our sessions about how we even frame what that transition or what that result would be. Like, we would create, if we moved sixth graders, we would create a nurturing middle school experience, and ninth graders would no longer be there. So it's not a junior high model, it's a middle school model, and they're totally different.
Got it.
But there is quite a bit of parent concern about sort of engaging in a pace that feels too fast for moving our young kids into the older school model. Parents like the idea of keeping kids in elementary school as long as possible, is sort of the feeling that I got from the parents who don't support the move. And some of the same parents who said, let's keep the sixth graders in elementary, did support moving ninth graders to the high school. Like, it makes more sense to have ninth graders be able to participate in a traditional 4-year high school experience that includes a freshman experience at a high school.
Okay.
So I don't know. That's what I understood from listening carefully to community members. I don't know if those same trends were evident at the town hall meetings 5-6 years ago.
Well, there was one town hall meeting,
Oh. Okay.
and
Very last minute.
I think I'm the only one here that probably attended it. And I won't say it was hijacked by people that were opposed, but it was certainly dominated by people who were opposed. And we got feedback after the fact that there were people that felt intimidated, that wanted to speak up on behalf of moving to a middle school model, but they felt intimidated. So we got some after-the-fact feedback about that. But you're right. I think most of the concern was sixth graders moving to a middle school as opposed to ninth graders going to a high school. So,
Great.
I will say that if we continue to get increased numbers of pre-K and kindergartners, we will not have space for sixth graders in elementary. So, are we talking about a situation where there's an enrollment prediction that truly forces us
yeah.
to transition our sixth graders to a nurturing middle school model and, do it in such a way that we have space for the littles in elementary, and we're supporting our sixth graders really well in that new middle school design.
That's great.
Yeah.
One question I have, and it's not necessarily a question you could answer now, but what about IB? Like, what if ninth graders move to the high school, for example? What does that make of the current IB program at the middle schools? At the
It's a
junior
good
highs?
question. So technically, middle school or junior high IB is called MYP, Middle Years Program, and it's usually like a grade 6 through 10 experience. So it's supposed to extend through 10th grade, and the educators in our system who support and love IB would really love to see ninth graders continue with their IB learning at the high school, if they're in ninth grade at the high school, and have it continued through 10th grade. And then, obviously, if there are some folks who don't favor IB as much, then they would be hoping for the opposite, but it will be an issue that we'll have to contend with.
Thank you.
I had just a question again on the ninth grade issue, which I think is great because I think it opens up access to our ninth graders to start taking high school level curriculum and classes. Like I'm just thinking about my ninth grader next year would be able to take AP classes and those kinds of things. So I think that that's great. But I am wondering about, have we gotten, and I'm sure we have, but I would be interested to learn what kind of staffing issues that might present. Are we, are the ninth grade teachers from the junior highs going to move up to the high school, or how that's going to shift? So just thinking along those lines.
Yes, staffing is a whole just work stream in and of itself in terms of looking at what a feasibility study would help us understand would need to be true in order for the ninth grade experience to be appropriately staffed at the high school. So, yeah, I mean, staffing, whether we end up moving sixth graders or move ninth graders, we absolutely have to make sure that the licensures are taken into consideration so that we're meeting all of our statutory requirements. But yeah, staffing would be, that's a whole puzzle that we'd have to figure out. I mean, I think it would be maybe more complicated if we were moving sixth graders. I do think that many of our teachers teaching ninth grade are licensed, like 712. But we'll have to for sure figure that out. And there's so many, we're one of the remaining districts to shift. So there are many high schools that we can partner with and learn from. Most of the high schools, all of the high schools were surrounded by our 912 models. So we can easily learn from those present day examples.
Do any of them have IB? Or is that something we'd have to kind of navigate on our own?
St.
Yeah,
Louis Park does.
I think Fridley is all IB. But yeah.
Are you aware of other districts in the state that have year-round school models?
Yes.
For elementary, and where are they?
I think there are at least 2 in Rochester. Do you remember the
There's at least
AMSD
one in
meeting?
Rochester.
And I thought there was one in St. Paul as well.
Could
that
be.
They have like one school that does the year round, and then there's a choice to go to another school that doesn't.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I remember attending an AMSD meeting, and the principal from the year-round school in Rochester was talking about his year-round model in a very favorable way. He said teachers loved it.
Oh, wow.
And at the National School Boards Association meeting one year, I attended a presentation by the Overland Park, Kansas school district that had gone to year-round school for one elementary school. So they talked about the challenges. There's always issues with staffing. Not every staff member wants to go to year-round school. Not every parent wants to go to a year-round school, so that's why it hasn't been implemented district-wide in most cases.
Rhoda, weren't there some studies done just regarding those, the redesigning subjects that Meredith had online? She had like a link.
Say again, Director Khan?
Just a link just regarding, the 4 options that we're going to be exploring. I thought Meredith
different
had like a
articles and-
website for
Yes.
that and a link.
Yes, so on our webpage, we've provided links to a ton of research
Right.
that we've conducted, mostly articles. but also some pieces that reference other models that we can explore.
Do you think we could like put that on one of the board packets?
Oh,
Just
sure.
for parents to easily just go there because, you know, they don't know where to navigate and go.
Sure. And I think while we're on this topic, I might as well just share some of the survey results. Is that okay? I was going to share it during the
Sure.
superintendent report, but
Sure.
we're spending time here. So I can take a look. After I share this, I can take a look to update you on what the current number of responses are, but this was as of recently more than 3,000 respondents. And you can see here that we have mostly white respondent base with the other race and ethnic categories represented there in various colors. The question on the bottom, would you support one of our elementary schools being a year-round school? So 19% very much. The 21% the teal, so moving from right to left, somewhat, and dark blue undecided. So I was pretty surprised at this level of favorable response to at least the idea of exploring or supporting a year-round school. And then the question on the right, would you facilitate regularly scheduled and or frequent outdoor experiences if you had the right support? So this question was specifically for teachers. And as you can see, almost 57% of teachers said yes. So a lot of support right now for outdoor learning across content. Would you support a 22-23 school year implementation to later secondary start times and earlier elementary start times? 42% of 3,000 respondents saying yes, very much. 23% saying somewhat, 13% undecided. Top right, would you support moving ninth graders to the high school even if it resulted in a 7-8 middle school model? So 35% saying yes, very much. And 23% somewhat. And the last question, would you support keeping sixth graders at the elementary schools if it results in a 7-8 middle school model? 36% very much, yes. 21% somewhat. So I just wanted to provide a few glimpses of the data points that we'll be looking at with some interesting trends.
Could you share that slide deck with us?
Oh, sure.
Thanks. Was the survey translated into multiple languages and/or have we worked with our liaisons to make sure that families who don't speak English as their first language have been able to give input?
Yes, that is the work that we're working on right now. Abby Holm is partnering with Alex Fisher and our language liaisons to determine a way to make sure that we have representation from our top 3 language groups and from our non-white groups as well.
That's great, thank you. Anything else on this agenda item? Thank you, excited to dig in deeper in our November meetings. And so looking at taking action on the 23rd, right?
Yes.
Okay. Great, thank you. So our last agenda item will be a brief one, so we'll have a nice break before the meeting starts. But I just wanted to circle back in anticipation of welcoming at least 2 new board members in January, thinking through how we want to approach new board member onboarding. At this point, I have 2 specific asks, and if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about within this goal area, happy to do so. The first one is we had talked when we were setting our goals about an interactive, like Google Doc type handbook that we could prepare for the new board members that then could be like recycled and used year to year or election to election, I guess. And so I of course am running, and so it's not guaranteed that I will be here in January, but I can certainly help prepare the Google Doc. And so and I have a lot of that information gathered already from when I onboarded Director Cool. So looking for one or two other board members to help me compile that Google Doc handbook, if anybody would be willing, and we'd mostly be working within the Google Doc itself. So you could work on it kind of on your own time, and it shouldn't be super time consuming. Just, I wanted to have a couple other eyes on the process.
I would be happy to help.
Thank you.
Since I just went through it, I can help out a little as well.
Thank you, appreciate it.
I can help if you need it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I don't think you have a choice. It's like,
I mean, that's happening.
Note to self.
No, thank you, Rhoda. I appreciate that. And so I think, shooting to have that done, or a draft to bring before the board at the workshop on November 23rd. And then we can have that prepared for new board members, so they can start, working with that Google Doc in preparation to join the board in January. So kind of looking at that timeline. So thanks, Shannon and John and Rhoda. And then looking at doing a retreat similar to what we did in August, like a half-day retreat in January, to just sort of level set as a board and check in with our goals and see if we need to adjust anything. And if there's anything else specifically that you would want to do at that retreat, we can kind of start brainstorming. But I wanted to just check in with you first and see if you like the idea of doing a half-day retreat in January.
Yeah, I'm on board with it.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
Excellent. So we would, of course, be avoiding the MSBA conference days.
Yeah, good.
That's, I think, the 13th and the 14th, right? So I can ask Elise to help us with scheduling. We probably wouldn't schedule that until after the election next week, so that we know which board members would be joining us for that in January. Okay, those were my two things. Anything that you wanted to talk about in regards to onboarding? Wonderful. Well, let's end this workshop, and I'll see you back at the table shortly before 7 for our meeting.
All right.
I know.
We actually get to
Looks like Roseville has
Good evening. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is called to order at 7 p.m. I am Board Chair Jen Bouchard, and so happy to be at the board table with my board colleagues and our student board representatives this evening. I'd like to welcome any of our community members who are joining us via the YouTube live stream. Our first agenda item is open agenda. This is typically when we would take public comment. We are continuing to offer two options for public comment during COVID. So the first is to leave a voicemail with your comment that will be played during the board meeting. There are instructions for how to do that in the board packet. And then the second option, of course, is to visit us in person and fill out a public comment card and hand it to me before the beginning of the meeting. So for this evening, we received no voicemails and I received no public comment cards. So we will move on to our reports, and we're thrilled to have two of our student board representatives with us this evening. I'll turn it over to Parker first.
Okay, well, this week at the high school, I'll be honest, week after MEA, pretty uneventful as far as school stuff goes. We're getting to the end of term one. This is the last week of the term. So that's shifting classes coming up and all that good stuff. And winter sports are starting registration, so they'll be starting soon, and fall sports are wrapping up. And seniors are getting ready for the first admissions deadline for a lot of colleges, November 1st. So that's exciting.
That snuck up, didn't it? Vice Chair Anderson and I were just talking about how October just flew by. So I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one feeling that way. Thank you. Any board member questions or comments for Parker? Elif, welcome to the table.
Thank you. I actually believe that Isabella is on the Google Meet right now.
Oh,
And I
great.
think she just sent a comment in.
Oh, wonderful. We are not on the Google Meet, so we can't access the comment. I'm wondering,
If you would like, I'm here and I can present my.
wonderful. Good to hear your voice, Isabella.
Yes. Sorry, 1 second. Let me just get my camera on.
Oh, and it's good to see you too.
Yes. So it's so nice to see you guys. So I'm Isabella McCoy, and I'm the 10th grade, or sorry, I'm the 11th grade cohort coordinator. And the first term is about to end. Many students have been working hard to finish classes and take tests. It's been a pretty stressful week. When I had talked with many students about all the things they're trying to get done, I think it's important, like, we try to highlight students' mental health and make sure it's being talked about. And also another thing was Principal Ballard. She had sent out an email discussing new changes that could possibly be made in the coming years. And some of the things including the survey, for example, where later start times, the 9th graders moving up to the high school, and then 6th graders staying at the elementary, etc. I have been sharing this survey with other people my grade because some of these changes could be implemented next year, and our opinion is valued. And not many students had checked their email or taken the survey that I had talked to. It was also brought up in home base. It was brought up in my home base. I'm not sure if every teacher talked about it, but I think more emphasis needs to be brought to it because these decisions affect us too. And I think that's a really big thing. Another thing that has been happening recently for juniors is the practice SAT that took place recently, and then the ACT. Some juniors are already taking the ACT for that, and they're preparing for college. A lot of my friends have been meeting with college representatives, which is a big step in deciding what college they'll go to. And juniors have been working very hard, and they just want to thank Hopkins for supporting them through it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella, and thank you so much for sharing the survey with folks at the high school. It's really important to us to have that student input, so really appreciate your effort on that. Any questions or comments for Isabella?
I had just a comment that in the past, when I worked at the high school, they did have students take surveys during home base. So I don't know if you could do that, since this is such an important decision, and students do want to have a voice. It would be great if that would be a possibility.
Definitely. And I think it's something I want to bring up to other teachers or somebody because I feel like it didn't get enough attention the first time. So
Yep.
Yeah, as far as that goes, it was placed on the agenda that's given to all of the teachers for home base. But I mean, some teachers just ignore it because they can't get their students to engage. And I would say most students ignore it because they're just not engaged during home base. So I think that's an ongoing struggle of sort of communication and the ability of district communications, school communications to feel like personal. Because when students don't feel like the school is speaking to them, that's when stuff like survey fatigue starts to set in. And I think that's a big problem in the district right now. At the
definitely,
secondary level,
because
at
it
least.
was brought up in home based. I know some home based teachers did not go over it, but my home based teacher had talked about it, and I noticed just not many students were either paying attention or they just refused to take the survey. And I think that's like something, I thought it was so wild that, you know, something, such a big change, and we didn't have enough people really taking the survey, because we want a big group of people so we can really see what everybody wants, not just a small portion that will affect, you know, the decisions we make later on that will possibly change how they learn next year.
Absolutely. This is really important feedback. Thank
Yes.
you.
Do you all have ideas for how to personalize something like a survey? Is there something that would intrigue scholars at the junior high or high school levels and compel them to at least look for it or think about taking it? Can you think of anything in particular we could do differently?
I believe if we just shorten it, because 10 minutes doesn't sound like that much, but it feels like a lot. And I mean, I know I use that time to do homework and other things. So when you're comparing, oh, what's more important versus like, oh, this 5-minute survey you can take. And if our home-based teachers discussed more the effect that this would make, I think that would convince students, because from majority of their perspectives, this is just a hypothetical that might happen in like 6 years, and it's not going to affect us.
Definitely. And I agree with Elif on that, because I think either maybe teachers or somebody, if they had highlighted how vital it was to respond to those emails and to take that survey, I think that definitely would have encouraged a lot more people to take it, because my home-based teacher, she had went a little bit into it, but when I was reading the survey questions, they were like, they're literally talking about 2023 possibly implementing these, 2022 even, and it's coming soon. We might still be in school for that. Even then, we have, for example, Elif, she's a 10th grader, that will still affect her long past that. And I think it's just something that we need to try to figure out kind of how to engage students with that.
I absolutely agree. I think when we talk about personal connection and personalization, it's not necessarily personalizing the survey, it's just personalizing how we reach out to students. Like making sure that you're, as much as you can, you're talking one-on-one with students, saying this is really important for us as a district, this is why it's important, and we think you should fill out this survey.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. That why piece, that's a message that's coming through loud and clear. Like, why should we take time to do this, right? Like, what is the impact? And are our thoughts really going to be heard? So thank you. Thanks for taking the time to help us think through that better. And Isabella, thanks for joining via the Google Meet. So glad you did.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Elif, welcome.
Thank you. So just a couple of things. Halloween obviously is coming up, and I have a couple of friends who are on student council, and they're wanting to have this Friday be a dress-up day, which I think was a cute idea. And then students in Propel have actually been working on something called spookograms, where they are selling these little papers, and they're like $3, and I believe that part of the profits go to some donation. I don't exactly remember which. And basically you send it to a certain person, like heartograms, and they get a little bag of candy, which is really sweet. And then we have obviously had an influx of a need for subs, especially teachers in general. It's been a struggle, and it definitely interferes with classes progressing. For example, there's a certain Spanish teacher, I believe, who was gone for at least 2 weeks, and so every day that class had to have a substitute. And my Spanish teacher actually went back and forth during our class to their room to teach and come back to ours to teach, which is a struggle for both the teacher and the students. On a brighter note, girls soccer has done amazing this year. They did lose their previous game, but they got really far. And then finally, the bell has been inconsistent and recently changed to a startling noise. And I've heard so many complaints from friends. And my sister was talking to my dad once, and he heard it over the intercom, like over through the phone, and he was like, "What was that?" Like, it is super weird. And I don't know why they decided to change it to this. I liked the previous one. It was kind of like a tune noise versus this one. Yeah, chimes. Versus this one is a blaring sound, and it's uncomfortable to hear at 7 in the morning. Yeah, but that's all.
Oh, thank you so much. We were discussing the sub shortage at our previous meeting, and so it's really important for us to hear specific examples like what you're describing, how it not only impacts the class that needs the sub, right, but in the case that you're describing, impacts a whole nother class as well. So thank you so much for bringing that forward. Any questions or comments for Elif?
I would just say in that specific case, it was a matter of a teacher being replaced, and so that's the cause of the that particular incident. But it's definitely a general problem where, especially when students and staff have to quarantine, the need for subs is greater, and it doesn't. Yeah, and I feel like, okay, I don't know where that thought was coming.
Thank you. Well, and I'm not sure if all of our community members are aware that you can become a sub. You can get licensed for a short-term sub license, and the requirements are a 4-year degree in anything. You don't have to have teaching experience. Dr. Lightfoot will raise his hand if I'm saying something completely out of turn here. Okay, it's all good so far. I am in the midst of the application process because I wanted to see what it's like, and then I am also hoping that with my own teaching schedule next semester that I might be able to sub on some days. And so just if you're curious and want to learn more information about becoming a sub, reach out to any of us on the board, Dr. Mary Perry-Reed, Dr. Lightfoot, and we can get you that information. Because what our student board reps are saying is absolutely accurate. It is a real need in the district right now. So thank you for bringing that forward.
Something that we couldn't have communications do a little blurb on too. I mean, it seems like, I wouldn't know that. No, I don't know who'd want me as a substitute.
I would.
All right, kids, heads down, 7 up, like the whole time. But but I don't know that our community, a lot of our parents and caregivers know that.
We are working on that.
Okay.
Yeah, we think there could be some great candidates out there who
Yeah.
just don't know that we're
Yeah.
experiencing this dire need.
Right.
And the barrier is not that great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to our student board reps. So wonderful to have your voices here. Next, we'll move on to our superintendent's report with Dr. Mary Perry-Reed.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair Bouchard, and it's always good to hear from our scholars. I'm really happy with the new CIS Spanish teacher. I know him from a previous work experience. He's a fantastic teacher, and so those kids are in good hands. And we don't always find a super high quality teacher in the middle of the year, so we're really lucky to get Mr. Nelson. And it was a really challenging experience. So as our scholars reported, we are almost at the end of term one. It's hard to believe how quickly the school year has gone, and thankfully, and yes, it is a stressful time for, in particular for our older students, our junior high and high school students who may have some exams and lots of catching up to do, but thankfully that has followed the reprieve of MEA with folks at least having some time on Thursday, Friday. Our elementary staff did have a chance Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of last week to engage with parents for parent-teacher conferences, and also had some wonderful time for professional development. So it was nice for our elementary staff who've really, really been working hard this year to have a little bit of a lighter load in their schedule last week. So a few things that I wanted to highlight at the district level here. So I wanted to share a really cool opportunity. We had one of our former school board members, Chris Latondras, who serves as our Hennepin County Commissioner, co-hosted along with Chair Bouchard and myself a roundtable discussion at the high school. Actually, we had Principal Ballard greet the group. We had superintendents and board chairs from a few of the surrounding districts to talk about the federal relief dollars. Hennepin County has been provided a distribution from the federal government and is engaging in some community sessions to find out what district leaders, community leaders, parents would imagine those funds could be used to benefit families and to bridge some of the gaps that COVID has caused throughout our communities. So it was a really interesting discussion, and we enjoyed hosting all of those folks we had folks here from Orono, from Edina, from Eden Prairie. Yes, so it was a really rich discussion. I also wanted to share, there's a Star Tribune article that you're going to have to read. It's really, really interesting. October 12, Atlantis Wigfall is the admin assistant to Principal Ballard at the high school, and she's featured in this article about founding a double Dutch club for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and apparently 80s.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, she started with 12 members, and now apparently hundreds of African American women have joined this professional double Dutch group or club.
Is that jump rope?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so it's a really, really, really interesting article, and it was so fun to see Miss Wigfall featured in the Star Tribune. She is an amazing addition to our high school, and so it was fun to see her in the paper. Also at the high school, are any of you in orchestra? No, okay. Okay, well, our Hopkins High School Orchestra annually puts on the Young People's Concert where they invite the littles, and the littles come in their pajama outfits, their onesies, and the orchestra plays tunes from lots of the Disney videos. So it was a really fun event that they held in the Commons at the high school. For our school spotlight, quite a few of you were at Gatewood Elementary last week. We are partnering with the ICA Food Shelf and launched a food market that is co-located with a wellness center at Gatewood Elementary. And we're really excited about the partnership. The executive director of ICA, Dan Nahr, was present. We also had our Minnetonka mayor. Many of you were there visiting. We had our district leaders there, our SEL and mental health providers at Gatewood who have been working so hard on creating this space and these resources and opportunities for our families. So we're excited for the partnership, and I was really pleased to hear that ICA would like to partner with Hopkins Public Schools in other ways. And did some of you see Dan Nahr at the event last night, the Black Men Teach event? You
I
were,
wouldn't recognize him if
Oh.
I saw him.
he was there. We'll have to make sure we do the introductions.
Yeah.
But I was speaking with Dan last night about the support that he's receiving from his 12-member board around dreaming big to serve Hopkins Public Schools and our students. So I think we need to be really creative with our thinking and identify some needs that our families, staff, students have that they could help fill. And we're really, really thrilled about this partnership. For our department spotlight, we have Dr. Lightfoot back there. You know, we do have a very special department who has worked really at all hours of the day and night, supporting the hiring and onboarding of many, many new staff in our system. So this team is led by Dr. Lightfoot, Brady Flies. Is it Brady Fleas or Flies? Flies? Fleas, oh goodness. Maybe we should say the name correctly if we're recognizing them in the department spotlight. Julie Katzmarek, Abby Aldrich, Susan Young, and Monica Kennett. So this is a small but mighty team, and I just wanted to read some of what I've learned about this team. So, you know, what I do know is that they do everything that a typical HR department does, from recruitment to selection to onboarding to retention, benefits. And also, you know, what they do is provide personalized service to our principals, who have to be really creative with who and how they're hiring. And so this team really does go above and beyond. They have years of public and private sector knowledge and experience, and they deliver a service model that places primary focus on the human face of our human resources work, which is so important. They do know, if you have interacted with these individuals, then you know that they understand that the quality of their service directly impacts the lives of students, staff, and families that we serve. And so they are very particular about how they provide that service to our Hopkins community members. And we also wanted to share a challenge with you. So one of the things that we're thinking about, I had Nick help me with this, is that typically our HR departments can opt to reside in somewhat of a traditional space where all they do is, or where the bulk of their focus is on recruitment, selection, retention, development. But our HR department is thinking about how we would shift from a performance management platform to one that is built on personal actualization and self-development that builds for the future that we know will arrive, that we have to prepare for in different ways. And so they're really on their thinking and innovation edge, and they want to engage in the work, particularly around retention and development as we think about how we create a workplace culture that is high quality, where people feel happy, that offers balance, and we can have strong retention rates, and partner with our innovation, design, and learning department to make sure that people are properly developed while they are here. So I just wanted to put a spotlight on our human resources department and thank them for their service, and thank you, Dr. Lightfoot, for being a wonderful leader for that team. And then one note around in the superintendent updates, I'm trying to help board members and community members understand how we're moving forward on one or more of our system goals. So all 45 leaders in our system will be turning in their goals, their strategic goals, as aligned and designed to reinforce our 6 system goals. Those are due on November 1st. And then for this evening, I wanted to share with you the work that we're doing to focus on our culture system goal, which is increasing wellness by building a workplace culture that is safe and caring, where folks experience wholeness because we're increasing trust, we're sharing power, and we're creating conditions where people feel that they are of equal worth. So this notion of equal worth has become very important to us as we think about flattening our organization instead of continuing to follow a rigid and hierarchical structure. So one of the concrete action steps is that we're meeting with all of our union leaders across 9 bargaining units on a quarterly basis. We had our first meeting yesterday afternoon. And the purpose of these 90-minute sessions is to talk about what is going well across our system and within the culture that we have, that we're trying to improve, and what some of the challenges are. And one of the things that came up that I want to be transparent about is that we have many members of some of our bargaining, of some of our labor groups who do not feel valued in our organization. And some of these members belong to, are in positions that, where we are not, that are not receiving competitive compensation. So think our bus drivers, our nutrition services staff, our paraprofessionals, some of our clerks, right? If we're paying folks $15, $20 an hour and these are not resulting in livable wages where folks can raise a family and, cover all of their expenses without getting a second or third job, then it's hard to feel valued. Also, we need to find ways of creating opportunities for everyone to come together at the meetings and gatherings that we have. So, for example, when we have our Welcome Back Day in early August before we launch into the school year, in the long past, we have placed a significant focus on professional development for our licensed staff. And our non-licensed staff are saying, we need that development, we need that professional learning as well. And so how can we work together to make sure that when there's professional development offerings, when there are staff meetings, everyone participates in that meeting. Everyone participates in the opportunity to be developed. And those development opportunities are designed to support the specific learning needs of folks within specific roles. So we have a lot of work to do in our organization so that people truly feel that they are highly valued regardless of the role or position that they are in. And, I'm not saying that this sentiment of feeling undervalued is shared by every, individual across the organization, but I would say it's enough of a sentiment that causes us to pause and look at ourselves and look at our practices to answer the question around what can we do differently or better to create the culture that we say we want to create. So that's where we are, and I just think it's so important to have these honest and candid conversations because that's a starting point, and we can only go up from there. But it was good to create that space to hear from our members and to identify some low-hanging fruit that we can take action on right away. And I think, and then I did want to just remind, we did during the workshop earlier, provided an update on our community engagement sessions around our learning redesign topics. We do have a survey out there with 3,175 responses as of about 45 minutes ago. And so if anyone would like to, do you think any scholars are listening right now to the board meeting? Doubtful. So if there is a person, you could capture the QR code and then soon we'll have 3,176 responses. And what I'd like to do is maybe write a paragraph that provides a compelling why and send it to Principal Ballard that she could forward to teachers to share with students so that we can try to appeal to our scholars.
Something like this during their, like,
Right?
homeroom where they can scan the QR code, that makes it seem like
Yeah.
it's going to be quick and easy.
Or put it on a poster board as they're walking into the lunchroom. Okay, so that is it for the report this evening. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reed. Questions or comments? Wanted to add a little bit of context. I was going to talk about the event with Commissioner Latondras during my board member report, but I'm so glad you did it because now I can take that part off of my board member report. But I just did want to add a couple of kind of specific collaboration areas that we were able to identify during that meeting. And I'm talking about collaborations between school districts and Hennepin County. So looking at investments in student-facing mental health. So the county is already allocated in this area. And so looking at how the county can partner with districts to support the work that we're already doing in mental health. And then also career training and development. There was a lot of energy around that in the conversation. The county does have some really robust career training and development already for county jobs. And so looking at how we can work together to open up those opportunities for our scholars. And then also looking at supports for students and families experiencing homelessness. Hennepin County is doing a lot of systemic work to eliminate homelessness and houselessness. But look, in the meantime, we're talking about how can we identify and fill these gaps. And so looking at that support piece. And all of us around the table identified the fact that, we as school boards interact a lot with the state legislature. We interact with our city governments. And there hasn't been like a systematic way of interacting with and partnering with county government. So just kind of identifying that possibility and starting to ideate around what that would look like. All right. Well, with Director Adams, did you
I said, good idea.
Oh, good. I'm glad. All right. Well, with that, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? See none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move to the treasurer's report with Treasurer Adams.
All right, thank you, Chair Bouchard. At this point, well, as of September 30th, we were 17% into the fiscal year for 2022. And as of that point, we're at 14% of the annual general fund budget year to date. So we're keeping things contained. It was 13% at the same time last year, but last year was an extraordinary kind of year. And so I don't expect us to track along with that one identically. Expenses of note this time included $13,083 to Apple Computer for 277 iPad repairs. And I don't know if that's unusual or not, but it seemed like a lot to me. I don't know if
It's not unusual.
Isn't it? Oh, okay.
No, really. I'm sorry.
You've worked with them.
I worked with so many kids, and I'd be like, why? There'd be food all over them. And they'd be thrown down cracked. I'd be like, what did you do? Did you throw it down your stairs? That had happened, apparently.
Yeah, I'm
Yep.
sure.
So.
Well, at any rate, 277 iPad repairs so far this year. We spent nearly $25,000 for new Epson projector replacements in 29 classrooms at the high school. So we've upgraded that technology. And a sign of the oncoming seasons, $4,418 for ski passes at Highland Park ski area. $600 for membership in the Minnesota State Mathematics League. And we've been doing some construction over the summer apparently at West Junior High because there were bills for over $216,000 for construction there. And we've been cleaning up our last fiscal year, the 2021 fiscal year. We received final billings for graduation expenses, some special education expenses. Our special education expenses always seem to lag the fiscal year. So, and I'm sure there's some pressure to resolve all of these because our audit is we're undergoing an audit right now, our annual audit. And as usual, hundreds of thousands of dollars for food under the USDA's summer meal program, where every student in our district gets a free meal every day. So with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $4,975,607.69 for the period September 28, 2021 through October 18, 2021.
I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report. Is there a second?
Second?
I have a motion and a second to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll move into new business now, and our first agenda item under that category is our policies and first read, and I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Andreessen. And we'll welcome Dr. Lightfoot to the table.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. Our monitoring committee met and reviewed policies 303, 303.1, 351, 353, and 354. Many of them were rather routine in nature, and not many suggested changes. One was around a discussion in policy 303 for superintendent selection process, just making sure that it is an inclusive process. So with that, I will turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be with you all this evening. What you have in front of you, as Director Andreessen outlined, are the policies that the committee reviewed at its last session. Specifically, this section is on our superintendent and school administration work that occurs, and specifically, these are the policies that are set within that 3 to 4 year cycle for review. So the first one is the superintendent selection process. As was noted, the general change that was made to this policy is in section 4A on an inclusive process of not wanting to be very specific about how it should actually be done, but given that parameter and wanting to outline that parameter that it be inclusive when future boards look at what this might entail. So that was policy 303. If there are questions or comments at this time on 303, we certainly could entertain those.
Was the intent behind adding inclusive, thinking about how the board might engage the community in that process?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Any additional questions? Okay, I think we can move along.
All right, 303.1 is an interim superintendent appointment. There were no changes recommended to this. Again, it was just up for its continual review. And if there is any discussion or comment on 303.1, we would be open to that as well.
Looks like we can move ahead.
351, the development of regulations. As we do our work with policies, and as you well note, the policy itself is usually guidance to the administration, and then the administration in its implementation develops those regulations, and that's specific to the directives that are given from Policy 351. So if there are questions or comments or anything that we need to do with 351, open to that as well.
Looks like we can keep moving.
Great. 353 are temporary administrative arrangements at such times that those would arise, specifically outlined within the policy in 353. A couple little grammatical edits that we'll make in that we didn't catch along the way that I've circled for future note. But other than that, are there anything else that would be part of 303 for discussion, comment, or questions?
I think we can move to the last one.
Last one is program consultants. I'm specific that when we do have a need for program consultants, those contract needs are outlined specifically in paragraph 2. Again, no change proposed for 354, just a general review. Comments, questions, or any additional dialogue or discussion on 354?
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot and Vice Chair Andreessen and the Monitoring Committee for your work on this policy review. And with that, I would look for a motion that the board approve the above policies in first read, that the board direct the administration to prepare the policies for approval in second reading at the next meeting as part of the consent calendar.
So move.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to transfer funds from the Ecfe fund balance to the Community Ed General Fund, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. I'm going to invite Director Chapanduka and Director Fisher to the virtual board table. The framing for this is that community education is requesting a transfer of $300,000 from early childhood family education, so ECFE, restricted fund balance, to the community education general fund. And so we'd like for the school board and community members to fully understand the nature of that request. And I'm not sure who is speaking first, but I'll turn it over to the Director Chapanduka and Director Fisher.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry. Good evening, Chair Bouchard. Good evening, board members. I'll probably frame this and I'll give the honors to Director Fisher to go ahead and present to the board. What I'll frame this on is, as you know, when you were impacted by the pandemic, the state of Minnesota, Department of Education, allowed school districts to be able to transfer funds within some of their different operational accounts to cover for some of the impacts which we're seeing in certain areas within proprietary funds. As you may know, community education was impacted significantly because of the services they provide to the community during the COVID-19 and the request to meet the timelines, which were actually allowed within 2 fiscal years, which is fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, is for the board to authorize community aid to be able to move funds from their early childhood fund, which has been very healthy. If we look at our fiscal year 20, the fund balance for early childhood was sitting at $295,551, which represents about 50% of their savings, which are sitting within the budget, considering their operational expenses. And when we move forward to fiscal year 21, before any transfer, the fund balance for early childhood is sitting at about $560,697, which represent about 160% of their operational savings. With that, I'll hand over the presentation to Director Fisher to give us some more context. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Chapin-Duca, and thanks, Dr. Mary Pierre Reed. Good evening, Chair Bouchard and respective board directors and public viewers. I just wanted to provide a little more background about the transfer of funds we're requesting tonight. So with your permission, I'll project my screen to show just a brief presentation that I put together. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Let me request to show my screen here. Oops. Okay, so I can't do this, so hold on one quick. All right, let's try this. Okay, please let me know when you can see my screen.
See it?
Okay, thank you. Okay, wonderful. So to give you some context here, community education, as you know, is part of Fund 4. That's the Community Services Fund or the Community Education Fund. Within community education, there are various restricted funds. The restricted funds mean that those, the monies in those accounts cannot be used for anything but the programs that they're supporting. So for example, there are 5 restricted accounts in Fund 4 or in community education. There's the regular community ed fund. There's the Early Childhood Family Ed Fund or the ECFE fund. There's the School Readiness Fund, the Adult Basic Education Fund, and the Preschool Screening Fund. And again, those are restricted accounts. So the money in there can't be used for anything but those programs. And tonight, we're requesting a transfer of $300,000 from the ECFE reserve account, or I'll kind of be using reserve account and restricted account interchangeably, but it's for our intents and purposes, it means the same thing. So for the ECFE restricted reserve account, we're asking to transfer $300,000 to the regular community education fund. And again, both of these funds sit in Fund 4, or both of these accounts sit in Fund 4. So the ECFE reserve account is only for ECFE programs. ECFE programs include things like home visits. They can be used for ECFE admin costs up to 5%, instructional materials, instructional equipment. They're used to pay for teachers and staff and for tech equipment like computers. And the regular community education fund is used, can be used for many different things. There's much more latitude in the regular community education fund than there is in the reserve accounts. And for example, the regular community education fund can be used to pay for enrichment programming, and that would include pre-K enrichment, youth, adult, and Camp Royal enrichment programming in camps. It can be used to pay for engagement, things like liaisons, translators, and interpreters. It can be used to support high quality childcare for programs like Kids and Company and Stepping Stones. It can be used for early learning, so it can support our preschool programs. And it can also be used for ECFE, although it's not restricted like the ECFE restricted account is. It can also be used for pre-K screening. It can be used for facilities rentals, so we can do things like pay building supervisors or perform routine building maintenance with the regular community education fund. And it can be used to support our adult basic education program. And in ABE, we have adult ESL, career pathways classes, and GED classes, and we pay the instructors and the staff in those programs. So the regular community education fund can be used to pay for all of these things. There's not the restriction that there is in the ECFE fund. So as Director Chapin-Duca mentioned, the COVID pandemic did hit community education particularly hard. So these funds would help with shortfalls in the areas of enrichment, high-quality childcare and early learning, and specifically in the program areas that are highlighted in yellow. So I hope that's given you kind of a broad overview. I'm sure I don't want to speak for Director Chapanduka, but I would be happy to answer any questions. I'm guessing he would too, but I will stop sharing now and allow you to ask any questions.
Thank you, Director Fisher. Questions or comments from my board colleagues?
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Vice Chair Andreessen.
Hi, Director Fisher. I just had a quick question. I guess I'll just share a quick anecdote. This ECFE funding is something that I think was, I just became interested when I saw it come up on our agenda, because my first educational advocacy was when my child was very young. And we went to the Capitol to lobby for increased ECFE funding for the state of Minnesota. So I'm wondering, what is the thought process behind? I think that those dollars, that program, ECFE, is beloved in Minnesota, is my understanding. I know we took full advantage of those when my kids were younger. What is kind of the reasoning behind feeling that there's a surplus of money in that fund? If you could just give me a little bit of context, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Director Andreessen. So the ECFE fund receives revenue in the form of levies. So there's an ECFE levy. There's state aid, so we receive ECFE state aid as well. Any fees that the program generates and any grants that the program generates, those go into the ECFE fund balance. Just for context, the ECFE levy this year, in fiscal year 21, brought in $343,000. And I'm sorry, back up. The ECFE levy in fiscal year 21 brought in $371,000. So what happens is, if we do not use the money in that fund, then it continues to grow. And so the way that you would bring it down is, if our expenses outpace our revenue, then we would tap into that fund to help pay the difference there. So ECFE, as you mentioned, is very beloved. As I mentioned, the levy was $371,000 in fiscal year 21. There was ECFE state aid in fiscal year 21 of $192,000. And so those are healthy amounts that continue to grow in that fund balance, and we predict that it'll keep growing. As Director Chapanduka mentioned, this is a special situation just for fiscal year 20 and 21 that the state allows us to do just in these 2 years to help offset shortfalls in other budget areas. And we will continue to grow that restricted account as well.
And if I can also maybe add some more context to Director Fisher's explanation. So our general fund balance policy specified that our fund balance should sit between 6 to 10% within our funds. Right now, before the transfer, the fund balance, preliminary fund balance for ECFE is sitting at 160%. It has been sitting at around 50% in the last 3 fiscal years. Just like Director Fisher said, it's been growing. It grew by 265,146 just this past fiscal year.
So what is the reason, do you think, for that? Is it because we have less expenses, less classes being provided, less people taking advantage of ECFE? I guess I'm just wondering why there's a huge surplus all of a sudden.
I think it's a really good question. I think COVID has had something to do with it. You know, I think people are less likely, they've been hesitant to go out in as many classes as before. Out in our district, our ECFE numbers are doing very well, especially in compared to some of our neighboring districts. I just heard from Edina today. And, you know, I think comparatively Hopkins is doing very well with our ECFE classes. It covers a wide range. You know, I think when you talk about ECFE funds, it can cover from birth all the way up to 3rd grade for parent education. And I think we want to continue doing more in that space. You know, it requires collaboration between K-12, especially kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade teachers to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're teaching parents aligned material, curriculum aligned material. So I think there's more that we can continue to explore. Right now, the bulk of our classes are for you know, to prepare students for kindergarten, and that there's a huge parent ed component, so getting parents educated with their children at the same time so that they enter kindergarten ready and prepared. We have expanded our classes for 2- and 3-year-olds in ECFE. So, you know, those classes are strong as well. I think when we look at infants and really younger kids, we're not quite as strong in that area. I think we could continue to grow with the smaller infants. So that's just some background. It's an area we want to continue developing. I think you asked a good question. I don't know, Director Chapanduka, do you have any other insights to add?
No, not at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, our revenue, I'm not sure from the expense side of things, but from the revenue side, we've been getting more revenue.
Yeah.
And again, you know, it's also, you know, just the unusual COVID-19. And this is something which usually doesn't happen. That's why we're only given this opportunity. We won't be able to do any transfer in the future in the same manner as and flexibility which we have been given.
So I see in the packet that it says even after the transfer, ECFE would have a fund balance of over $260,000. And so that means as programming ramps up, you know, Director Fisher, you're talking about kind of looking at growing programming in the area, there would be funding left in the fund balance to help facilitate that transition. And then, of course, we can expect funding to continue to come in for ECFE beyond this year, obviously, as it has in previous years. Is my understanding correct?
That's correct, Chair Bouchard.
Okay, thank you. Any other board member questions or comments? Okay, thank you to both of you, Director Chapanduka and Director Fisher, for helping us in the community understand the rationale behind the fund transfer. Very helpful. So we need to do a roll call vote for this, which means that Clerk Peterson is on the job. So with that, I would look for a motion that the board authorize the transfer of funds from the ECFE fund balance to the Community Education General Fund to cover projected budget shortfalls in the community education programs.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Director Adams.
Aye.
Director Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Kahn.
Aye.
Director Cool.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. And Chair Bouchard.
Aye. Thank you, Clerk Peterson. We have 6 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries.
All right.
Next, we'll move to our board member reports. And I really want to hear what Director Adams has been up to. So we're just gonna start with Director Adams.
Nothing.
Lies.
Well, I did attend a couple of events that were put on by the Hopkins Race and Equity Initiative. One was on October 14th. It was the Hopkins Center for the Arts. And it was a kind of a town hall meeting regarding affordable housing. And they had a panel, and I would say probably about 100 people attended it. So it was a pretty good turnout to talk about affordable housing. There's a limited ability for the city of Hopkins to build any more affordable housing because there's already so much there. So, but it does shift from year to year. What used to be affordable may not be next year. So, but we had some interesting discussions. The second Hopkins Race and Equity Initiative event I attended was last night, and that was at LTD Brewing. It was a fundraiser for Black Men Teach, and not as big of an attendance at this event. It was outside, it was cold, and so people were a little motivated to move on. But as you may know, we have an arrangement with Black Men Teach. They're a tenant in this building, and we are working with them to try and create opportunities for Black men to become teachers and find locations to be a teacher. So, and it was interesting, the number of school districts and other interested parties who attended. And Superintendent Mary Perry Reed was there as well. But after you left, there was an interesting conversation that took place with a representative from the Shakopee School District. And she really gave Hopkins some props because she says nothing like this exists in the Shakopee School District. And gave us some kudos for taking the lead on trying to address the disparity in terms of minority representation in the teaching force. So that was reassuring to hear. So, and other events I attended, Rhoda and I had our quarterly meeting with municipality officials. It was lightly attended, shall I say. But we did have two council members, one from Minnetonka, Rebecca Shack, and one from Golden Valley, who used to be a Meadowbrook parent, Julian Rosenquist. So talked about issues that are taking place in both of those cities and that have some impact on the school district. And then, of course, LEC meets just about every Friday. So, but we're gaining more attendees as some students from the high school have joined us on occasion. I think we had, what, 3 last time, Shannon, from the high school. So that's my report.
Thank you. I mean, I've never accused my board colleagues of being a liar before at the board table, but I knew you were lying when you said that you weren't up to anything.
Well,
it's just not in your nature, Steve.
I know. I did do it.
Any other board member reports?
Chair Bouchard?
Yes, Director
I
Kahn.
have a report.
Wonderful.
I was invited to attend the Hopkins Educators of Color Mentorship Program meeting, and it was really great to talk to everybody, and also to see how many people of color are now in our district. They seem to have multiplied significantly. So we had a good, I'm trying to find the document that I had up here. You know, their purpose is to build community strength and support teachers in Hopkins schools, hear and share experiences, both positive and challenging, and engage in professional development opportunities. So it was really great to hear everybody. There was a big screen and there were so many people online, more people than in the room. And they just, we were able to break out into groups and talk about what were some current problems or issues that are currently impacting education. And there were some teachers in my group who were all from elementary school, and they just said that they were having trouble having students sit in one place, which is not surprising. And they're like, yeah, they go out into the hall sometimes. I was like, well, that's because, they aren't used to sitting in one place for a long time because of COVID. So they forget how to act in a school. And then some students also have trouble concentrating. And I think that's not surprising because if you are online all the time, the way most students were, unfortunately, because of COVID, you do kind of get some kind of attention deficit issues. So it's pretty common, at least the studies that I've read. The second thing that I went to was the AMSD meeting, which Steve was supposed to be at. I don't know why.
Get an invitation, I don't know.
I don't know why.
Be there.
I was like searching for you and I'm like, where is he? Usually I see him. And usually I see Rhoda too. Did you not get the invite? October 15th?
She didn't get, you didn't get it either.
I always attend.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, anyways, it was on the 15th and there was a nice presentation done by the Equity Alliance, headed by Sebastian Witherspoon. They do equity audits, work across the state, and they were talking about how education has not served students of color equitably. They discussed how Indigenous peoples in particular, unfortunately, they have been, not performing so well during COVID. And unfortunately, they had really low numbers. And they discussed how we should have more of an equity mindset and how every child is worthy. The other thing that they discussed later on was how much trouble, unfortunately, school board members across the state are having with parents who do not agree with the mask mandate. So, yeah. And that's my report.
Thank you so much, Director Khan.
I've got a question for Director.
Sure. Yeah.
Where was the meeting of the Hopkins Educators of Color?
Oh, it was here. And
Room?
yeah, not in this room. It was down the hall over there.
Okay.
I forgot which room number, sorry.
Oh, never
Yeah.
mind. All right.
It was really nice.
Thank you.
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Vice Chair Andreessen.
Just wanted to quick mention that we have an election coming up. So I've been going through, I'm sure you forgot, Chair Bouchard, but that it's really, really important for everyone to vote. I've been going through my election judge training with the City of Minnetonka, and I want to invite all of our excellent, engaged, civic-minded scholars to also do that. They take students. One of my kids did it last year and loved the experience. And Hopkins is always well represented. So hoping that happens again. I had the District 287 board meeting and got a really robust update on the superintendent search that's happening there. There was an opportunity for member districts to give feedback on what they would like to see in a superintendent for District 287. So if you haven't completed that survey, there's still time to get your input in. I also was able to attend the ICA food market at Gatewood and thought that was a really nice program. And I know I spoke with the ED there, and he's eager to keep partnering, as you mentioned, Dr. Mary Peary-Reed with Hopkins, and maybe have more of the same at different locations throughout the district. And then something that was mentioned earlier by one of our school board student representatives, and then also Director Khan touched on it as well. I read a study that was published in Pediatrics, and it talked about the impact of COVID-19 on children, and what they found is that more than 140,000 children across the U.S. lost caregivers over the past year. And it, of course, has disproportionately impacted different communities based along racial lines. And for our community in particular, children who come from tribal lands and nations are 4.5% more likely to be impacted than white students. And that is concentrated in states where there are tribal lands and I don't know if we call them, do we still call, I don't know what they call them. Anyway, if they have a large population. And it was also 2.5 times more likely for Black students to be impacted and 2 times more likely for Latino students to be affected. So I just wanted us all to be mindful that that's what our students are walking into the school building with, carrying with them, and that a focus on mental health and getting kids used to being back in school, and that their social emotional needs are tended to is probably, I think, our highest priority as a district. So,
Thank you very much.
Chair Bouchard,
Yes.
got a question for Rhoda and for Shannon. How often is the food bank at Gatewood going to be open? What are the hours for that, do you know? Is it open every day?
No, I think it's 2 days a week is what I heard Dr. Nolan say. Is that what you heard as well?
yeah, it's also by appointment.
Okay.
Okay.
So you can contact, I think there's 2 staff contacts, a counselor and I can't remember the other
Okay.
position, but you can definitely call Gatewood and I'm sure they would connect you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. It's beautiful too.
Mm.
Like, I just wanted to hang out in there. It's like, I'm going to sit here and eat an apple.
The green room.
The green room. Yeah, that's great. Other board member reports. Well, this is the great thing about going last. I was like checking things off. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you talked about that. Thanks for talking about that. So I just, mine will be short. I had the privilege of visiting Shafi Tutoring Center on Blake Road last week. That's owned by a Hopkins parent, Kadra Abdi, and she's doing some really phenomenal work supporting our Somali scholars and their families. And this is my second visit to Shafi over the past 2 years and just really enjoyed spending time talking with her, talking with the scholars who were there, and the educators who she's brought in. So that was a wonderful afternoon. Director Khan had the wonderful idea to apply for the NSBA, the National School Boards Association Magna Awards, and so we've been working on that application with help from Imani, our student board rep, and staff members. And the Magna Awards are for a specific program that supports the school board's equity mission and vision for the district. And so we decided to focus on the Royal Reps and Royal Connections programs and really looking at centering student voice. So I wanted to let you know that we're applying for it so that when we get it, you won't be too surprised. And so thank you again to Director Khan for the idea to apply. And then just wanted to make sure my board colleagues had seen the email from Director Fisher inviting us to join the engagement sessions that will be starting up again with the liaisons through Community Ed and engagement. There's a sign-up sheet, and we're invited to participate in some of those as well. And yes, it bears repeating, please vote. Our local elections impact our daily lives in so many different ways. There are city seats up for election and school board seats up for election. You can vote at your city hall now, and then of course at your polling place on November 2nd. All right, what else are we doing here? Okay. Well, I think we just have one more item. With that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? See none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is adjourned at 8:14 PM.